Okay, cut the music. If anybody's listening, we're gonna have to fix our music because our music is definitely not like working for me. So, welcome to all our listeners as we continue to build out Sincerely with Sam Lewis. Thank you for joining those of you that are joining. Uh, so, this is a new episode of Sincerely with Sam Lewis. And today we're going to be focusing on voting and voting rights for formerly incarcerated people as we gear up for this pivotal election, both here in California and nationwide. Remember, we have 1 week for you to cast your vote. My family and I will literally be at our kitchen table Sunday, 12 noon, sitting down to look at our ballots and do all of it. We've done our research and then we vote together as a family. We have a great dinner, watch some football, but that's literally how my family and I vote. We vote together. I want to strongly encourage California voters to vote yes on Proposition 6 and no on Proposition 36. But please research the other candidates, judges, district attorneys, sheriffs, and elected officials. Research all of them. They have a huge impact on the criminal justice system and on how our communities are ran every single day. Like your voice, your vote is your voice. Today, we're going to talk about the importance of voting rights and learn how incarcerated people from across the U.S. feel about this election. And I think we might find kind of a mixed bag of results, which is it was surprising to me. We'll also hear from a first-time voter casting their ballots for the first time. So I want to introduce Nicole Lewis. Yeah, Nicole Lewis. That's right. Two Lewises on the podcast. That's right. But first, I want to welcome Nicole from the Marshall Project. Nicole is the engagement editor for the Marshall Project, leading the organization's strategic efforts to deepen reporting that reaches communities most affected by the criminal legal system. In 2020, she was the lead reporter on a first of its kind political survey of incarcerated people. Like, this is important. If you think about the United States that incarcerates more people than any other country, which is just still, I can't understand why in the 20th century we're still doing, 21st century we're still doing this. But anyway, so Nicole, in 2020, why did you want to start surveying incarcerated people on voting? Just out of curiosity.
Yeah, absolutely. So good to be with you, and hi to everyone out there. So I've covered felony disenfranchisement for many years as a reporter at the Marshall Project. And what I saw was that in the last 2 decades, there are about 2 million more people with felony convictions who now have regained the right to vote as a result of, executive orders, legislative changes. And so we had this natural question of, well, if people coming out of prison are coming back into a landscape in which they're legally eligible, how does prison affect their political views? Like, what actually happens when you go and spend time behind bars? Does that make you more liberal? Does it make you more conservative? Does it do something else altogether? And so we realized that no one had ever really asked people behind bars for their politics. And a huge part of that is because, for the most part, people can't vote. And so campaigns think, oh, well, they're not my constituents. They're not as important. And we thought, well, that's really short-sighted, right? Because the majority of people will come home. And now the laws are changing.
Interesting. So what are the current voting rights for incarcerated people? Do any states allow incarcerated people that have been convicted to vote?
Yes. So Maine, Vermont, and the District of Columbia are 3 places where basically everyone who's incarcerated can vote. Everyone who with a felony, anyone in prison, in DC, in DC, folks convicted there actually spend time in the federal system, so they might not be in the district themselves, but they are eligible to vote. But then there's actually, I think this is the little known fact, there are actually a handful of states where some people with felony convictions actually never lose their right to vote. Figuring that out is incredibly difficult. The
Mm,
states might actually surprise you. So Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, right, places that we typically think of as being extremely strict on voting rights for people with convictions. The thing is that they've added certain crimes to lists and not others. In Tennessee, it's crimes between, if you're convicted between certain years. So figuring this out is really tough. But technically, there are people incarcerated there who are still eligible. And then one last sort of interesting fact that I just learned myself is in Texas, there's a loophole, more or less, that, I mean, one way to look at it is a loophole that allows people who are currently and actively in an appeals process to vote. And so I believe the Texas Tribune just wrote about that a couple weeks ago. And so it was talking about some folks on death row who are technically legally eligible now. So it's really mixed. But Maine, Vermont, and DC are the places where pretty much everyone who's incarcerated never loses the right to vote.
wow. Wow, that California, where you at? Like, shouldn't we be somewhere in there? Shouldn't we be mentioned in that group of people or group of states? Like, just want to ask you, for my California voters, I definitely would like to be able to say California allows to do that. So I think that's definitely a policy that we have to work on pushing, because it's my personal opinion. I've been to other countries where this is a right you shouldn't lose, even if you're incarcerated. Like, okay, you're incarcerated, but the right that you lose is the right of freedom, not your other rights. So first, another question: how did you survey? So first, how many people? Because I know it's a lot.
Yeah.
And then how did you survey so many people, and what are the methods that were used to create and understand this particular survey?
Yep. So for the past 3 years, we've done this survey 2020, 2022, and now 2024. We have partnered with a few tablet companies, and these are companies that currently distribute our magazine. We have a magazine called News Inside, and they provide this magazine free of charge to incarcerated people. The platforms are typically ones that don't charge like crazy user fees. They're providing educational information, again, free of charge to incarcerated people. So we feel comfortable putting our information on those platforms too. And so they help us administer the survey to reach people behind bars, folks in prisons across the country, as well as in county jails. This year alone, we heard from 54,000 people. And that represents people in about 45 states and the District of Columbia, and about 785 different facilities across the country. And it is a large number, but it's really just a drop in the bucket in terms of how many people our country incarcerates. So we're really proud of it, but there's many more people out there that we would love to hear from.
So thank you. So I think this might surprise the answer to my next question. I think it might surprise some of our listeners. I consider myself a very informed voter. I'm also kind of like a political junkie too. So on Sunday mornings, I'm watching all the talk shows. Like, I go between all of the different networks because I want to see both the conservative views, the so-called progressive views. I read a lot. I read books that have been written that are new. I'm digging into all of it so I can understand both the history of the individual that I might vote for, the laws, where did they come from. And so I say all that to say, can you tell us a bit about the results of the surveys, and what are some of the major trends or surprises that you discovered?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So just like we did in our 2020 survey, which confusingly was also a race between, initially at least, between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, we actually found pretty robust support for Trump. So I wouldn't say the majority, but a large share of people that we surveyed are interested in Trump as a candidate. I'll say more about why I think some of the reasons for that. What we did notice was when Kamala Harris entered the race, she actually picked up a larger share of support than Biden did originally. So basically her support share doubled, right? So she performed better against Trump than Biden did. So those are the big sort of in terms of who would vote for president. Another big thing that we see is the majority of people behind bars, or the largest share of people behind bars that we surveyed, represent identified as independent. They actually don't identify as Republican or Democrat at the same rate. The biggest block is independent, and independent not leaning towards either party. They've really said, my politics are somewhere else entirely. Both parties have kind of left me behind, and so I'm really looking for a different set of views. So those are the big things. So if I could say a little bit more about, I think it might be surprising to find support for Trump behind bars, given that Trump has campaigned and spoken openly about pretty punitive policies, right, when it comes to the criminal justice system. You mentioned that on the outside, you're able to be a really deeply informed voter, right? You can consume the news, you can seek out answers to your questions. That's not entirely the case, right, for a lot of these guys and women in prison. So we can see that people told us basically that they felt as if they couldn't get enough news. They can't form deep opinions because they can't go and do their own research. They have limited access in terms of like the if there's TV news on, right, who controls it, who sets the channel, that kind of stuff. So that allows for sometimes kind of misinformation to be pervasive. And so when it comes to Trump, people are really interested in the idea that he is the guy who's let people out of prison. I think what they don't know, or what they don't realize, is that those releases were entirely in the federal prison system, where where as president you have more authority. Everyone in our survey is in the state system. So there's this sort of idea, a little bit of a misperception, that Trump might be able to do something for them, right? And so these photo ops that he takes, thinking about, Alice Marie Johnson, right? Just people knowing her name, her story, knowing that she's out because of him, I think is enough to be really, really motivating.
Interesting, but so like with Marie Johnson, just for and I would ask people. Hopefully, some people inside see this, and when they bring that name up, like, is it because of Trump or was it because of Kim Kardashian?
So it's because of Kim Kardashian. And I would say even more than Kim Kardashian, it's actually because there's a team of lawyers, Brittany Barnett in particular, people who buried alive, right? There has been, I think we get confused, right? When we see quick action, we think, oh my God, as soon as Trump and Kim start talking about this, then there's some movement. But the movement really represents a long history of people advocating, lobbying, right, raising awareness. Marie Johnson's Alice's name has come up multiple times, right? This was just the time that worked. And so I do think that is really important to point out, of like, any progress towards getting clemency, towards getting released, it's usually not the first shot, right? And there's usually a team of people who are behind you that we never see or don't see as much, who had to do a lot of the legwork to make it happen.
I thank you for that, Nicole. And for the audience, like, really understand that the advocacy piece behind the scenes that you don't see plays a major role in how things get shifted and moved. On a higher level, you might see sometimes celebrities will help, for lack of a better term, push the ball across the goal line. But the first 99 yards was done by advocates, attorneys, family members. Like, it was really, like, oftentimes grassroots push. And then now we're on the 1 yard line. Since we're in football season, I use that as an example. And Kim Kardashian can now make sure that we score and get a person home. So really take that into consideration, especially when we look at your vote and your voice and your power. Nicole, can you tell us how did the results change? So you touched on Kamala picking up a larger number. Like, so was that considered before Biden and then after Biden? And what are incarcerated people's views on having a woman president? Do they see this as a positive or a negative shift in the political landscape?
Sure. So we basically distributed 2 surveys. We did the first one over the summer when it was a Trump-Biden contest. And then we did a second one when Kamala Harris became the presumptive nominee. So that was later summer, I believe. And so because we did that, we actually had, of that 54,000 people, we had a subset of people who we could see took both surveys. There are about nearly 12,000 of those folks, right, who took the first one and told us who they vote for, and then who took the second one and told us who they vote for. So we could actually track their shift between the first time that they voted, right, and the second time. And so for Black folks in particular, a lot of folks who originally said, I'm not going to vote, a lot of folks who said, I'm actually going to vote for Trump over Biden, or folks who said that, of course, they'd vote for Joe, really pushed towards Kamala Harris, right? So they swung over pretty aggressively and said, in a Trump Kamala, I'm much more interested in Kamala as a candidate. For the white folks, we could see that they're kind of steadfast towards Trump. And a lot of the folks who who showed support for Kamala actually were folks who said that they would sit it out, or folks that said they'd vote for some sort of third party candidate. And so so Kamala performed a lot better. Because this is the third time I've done the survey, I will tell you that there's a lot of disdain for Joe Biden behind bars. I think people, and same for Hillary Clinton in a way, I think people credit these two Democrats with ushering in, supporting an era of mass incarceration with some of their policies. And so there's just sort of this sentiment of like, not this candidate. So people few of the folks we spoke to are wrestling with the idea of voting for or supporting a former prosecutor. They're very kind of skeptical, a little unsure. What does this actually mean for them? But they see the identities, the change that she represents just by nature of being not an older white man, as potentially very positive for them, right? Because again, if you look back, and people said this to us, well, every man who's been in charge hasn't really moved the needle for us. So maybe it's time to put a woman in place and see what we get. People also noted that they thought that Kamala represented middle-class interests way better, that Biden and Trump are part of the elite and therefore couldn't understand some of the main economic challenges that they're facing, and that Kamala being part of the middle class might be more helpful to them, improve the economy. And so much of criminal justice issues are really ones of poverty and economic opportunity. So I think there was some interesting kind of like, well, maybe we'll take her because if we can move the needle over here, maybe things would actually get better for us.
Wow. I like literally what you said is what I was thinking. One, poverty is a driver of incarceration. And what if we one day just decide, you know what, we're gonna have a serious war on poverty. We're gonna put training dollars and education dollars and like really help people become economically mobile, upwardly mobile, and really like double and triple down on this. We've had multiple wars on drugs, failed drug policies. Well, how about a war on poverty? Like that's my mantra now. We need to have a war on poverty. Let's change that. And so I love the fact that people are thinking that way. Like maybe it's time for us to look at things differently, a different way of how to change such a rich country, such a wealthy country with so many people that suffer from poverty. What news sources and ways do incarcerated people get to learn about politics and current events?
Yeah, I would say the biggest thing that I find so fascinating about this survey every year is people go to great lengths to kind of explain, right? We ask everyone, but they explain a little bit about the news consumption, right? So on the one hand, I'd say the biggest and most important thing to know is that many folks told us that they just did not have enough access, right? That they felt that important stories would be censored. They couldn't do their own research, right? That there was a sense of being kind of disconnected from the news and political discourse, right? So that's the top. I would say that's the thing we heard the most. But there are a subset of people who do have access to at least some news behind bars. And what we noticed is that news consumption was extremely segregated. So all of the Black folks, right? Many of the Black folks told us, yeah, we're mostly watching, if we can get it, we're watching the sort of CNNs and MSNBCs, right? We're watching those kinds of programs, and people told us, I find them less partisan. They're not perfect, but that's what we want to watch. And then white folks would say, yeah, I watch Fox News, right? And then they'd sort of explain to each other. So we could see, right? In one case, I heard from one person who was incarcerated who said, yeah, the administration did a survey about what channels we should have access to. We got rid of MSNBC because none of the white people watched it. They got Fox News and we kept CNN because that's, what we could get. And he was expressing what a loss that was, right, for him, for his ability to kind of look at multiple sources, read widely. So that's the biggest thing of like, even if there is a channel or a thread, the fact that people can't consult multiple sources, get multiple viewpoints, right, really make up their own opinions by looking at all these different channels. And by channels, I mean, outlets,
Yeah.
newspapers, watching the T rate, that there was a sentiment of frustration about that. Yeah.
Let me thank you, Nicole. Let me ask you this, Nicole. How do incarcerated people feel about voting or the political process, especially given that they're like, I know for 24 years I couldn't vote, and then for another 5 years when I was on parole I couldn't vote, and once I was off parole, in which for the viewers that's not true anymore. If you're on parole, you can vote, so make sure you registered to vote in California and you vote. But I couldn't wait to vote. Like I was so upset. I was out for when President Obama ran for his second term, and I couldn't vote because I was on parole. And so like I always look at it in a historical context too, like being able to like keep maybe the sticker from being able to say, hey, I voted in this time. But how do incarcerated people, like, given the feeling of being disenfranchised, like I don't have a vote or I don't have a voice and I'm in these cages?
Yeah. So this is a question that there's a really kind of complex answer to this question. So we're actually still in the process of analyzing that subset of data in our 2024 piece. But we did a pretty robust analysis in our 2020 piece. We heard from about 8,000 people in 2020. And what we found was that the longer people were incarcerated, the more their motivation to vote actually increased, right? So, and some of this is about the longer you're incarcerated, the older you're getting, and the more wisdom and awareness you have, the more accumulated experiences you have of witnessing the criminal justice system and understanding how it works, right? So there's a lot of factors within that. So we thought that was we're still kind of looking at that separately. We thought that was really, really interesting that having something taken away finally helped people realize the value of it, right? That these were many folks who were saying to us, in the years that I was on the outside, in my youth, when I was in the thick of a drug addiction, when my mental health was untreated, I didn't care about any of that. But actually facing the consequences of my decisions and connecting the dots between my own life experiences and the policies that shaped them, right? That this was something that people were doing while they were incarcerated. That there was a greater awareness of like, the poverty of my home life that then led me to XYZ consideration, right? XYZ decision is a policy issue. So it was only that sort of time away, in their words, that helped them regain the notion that their voice was really valuable. But I would say, by and large, what we see is that in the general population, there's actually a widespread apathy, and this makes sense to me too, because people feel so under the heel of something. They're sort of like, what difference does it make, right? There's a lot to get through. So both things are kind of true, right? The longer you spend, the deeper you are into your sentence, the more likely you see politics and voting as like centrally important to your own life and experience. But in those early years, it can be there's a lot of apathy. There's a lot of like grappling, I think, is really what we saw. A lot of figuring it out.
And Nicole, in a recent article, you mentioned that any interactions with the law, even a traffic stop, could keep someone from going to the polls. Why is that?
Yeah, I mean, the reason why I think is sort of it's complicated and sort of different for each person. But to expand a little bit on that research, so there's a great body of work that looks at like, what does it mean? What does it mean to have contact with the system in terms of people's civic participation? And so a weekend in jail, a traffic stop, right? These are new studies that basically show if you're picked up and you spend time in jail, and even if you don't get, your case is thrown out, you're maybe less likely to show up to vote, to register, to all of those things. And my sense of that is when I read the literature and also in reporting on people, is that they have a deep and visceral awareness of just how punitive, arbitrary, callous the system itself is. And so your natural reaction, I think, in some ways is pretty self-protective. Well, if that's how I get treated by the public officials, I'm going to turn away from. I'm not going to risk any of this, right? I'm going to turn away. There's a sense of active kind of disempowerment, right? But I think it's sort of fascinating that our survey really complicates some of that. That like for this subset of people who've kind of grown up, who've spent adult lives inside the system, there's actually a deeper awareness of just how important politics is. In some ways, politics is really their lifeline.
Okay. I know you have to sign off shortly, but I want to ask one more question, one from the audience and then one. So it's from Instagram. How do we encourage those incarcerated on misdemeanors to vote in absentee? Usually loss of voting rights only happens with felony convictions.
Correct. So most people in jail are still eligible. I don't know that they know that, right? So if you're in a position, when I report on these things, I'm mostly connecting to grassroots groups, advocacy groups that like actually try to find a way into the jail to do voter registration and to pass out information. So the biggest thing here is just information. People do not know what their rights actually are. The jail is not interested in some cases in telling them, right? Some jails do a good job. For the most part, from the research and the studies that I've seen, most jails don't do a good job. So if you're in a position to volunteer, I'll say the number one organization that I hear from all the time who are doing voter outreach in local jails is the League of Women Voters. You do not have to be a woman to participate, right? They are in the jails. They are registering people. They are giving voter guides and judge guides, right? So I'd say look for ways to provide that information. Get in touch with the sheriff. Ask what you can do. Because people they just really don't know what they have access to and what they're eligible to. And start early, right? Not every state you can do same day registration, right? So for some states, some places, the window has passed. I'm not sure what the rules are exactly in California, but start this work early, right? No reason not to do that.
Interesting. So just want to share. So we have a team of mentors that go into the juvenile facility here in California. So our youth that were convicted as juveniles, they're what's called adjudicated, and so their right to vote is preserved even after their adjudication is done. So if they're 18 or over, they're eligible to vote. And so we assisted a couple of other organizations in registering and providing voter guides to our young people that were 18 throughout the system. So for those of you that are listening, if you have the opportunity or the ability to support helping people register to vote and providing them with information so that they can be informed, please continue to do that. I think one of the most important things in what they call this amazing experiment of democracy is for people to vote, all people to vote. Your vote is your voice. Nicole, any last thoughts you want to share? Because I know you got to go. I could question you for hours about this survey.
It's fascinating. It's fascinating.
It is. It's
really great. I would say I think the biggest thing is I mentioned this on a podcast I did yesterday, that I think people think the presidential election is really important. And it is, of course. This one is going to be extremely consequential. But in 2 years, we are going to have a set of midterm elections. And those elections tend to be the place where your local elected officials are up for re-election. And I'm talking about, there's some on the ballot, I'm sure, this time around, but the sheriff, the governor, the judge, the district attorney, these are all people who administer, right, the criminal justice system. I think incarcerated people have a really unique vantage point, right? These are the folks, or people who are formerly incarcerated who are coming out. These are the folks who really understand how the system operates, whether or not it's fair, whether or not it's wasteful, abusive, whether or not there's fraud going on in some cases, right? And so your vote is an opportunity to kind of decide who should oversee those systems. And so that's what I always really like to make clear. President, yeah, it's great. It's going to be so important this year. But in 2 years, right? So if you think I'm missing the window now, don't forget, 2 more years when we're in those midterms, that is really where things become incredibly consequential. And so I always like to remind people of that fact.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you so much. And I want to echo what Nicole just said. Your vote is your voice. If you really want to have impact, yes, the presidential election is important. The midterms come up, and you have senators and Congress persons that will be running for office, but you also have sheriffs, our board of supervisors, you have judges, you have city council members, like all of these people, you have school boards that get voted in. Every single one of these people that are being elected, if you don't go out and vote, that means if you have children, you need to know who's on your school board. Do their views and their beliefs align with yours? If they don't, then you should know that, and you should know who you're voting for. From the president on down, every single, especially on the local level, your everyday life is affected by the people who are in city hall, who are sheriffs, are mayors. Like, all of those are people that literally your day-to-day life, how the buses run in your community. The streets, do they have potholes? How the money's being spent? All of that is determined by your ability to vote for people who make sure that you are taken care of. Again, I want to thank you, Nicole, for joining us. Again, check out the Marshall Project. Read the research. It's fascinating. Like, you see the geek side of me. This is some really like if you really want to understand the different modalities of thinking in this research, it's some incredible research to read in articles. Thank you, Nicole, again for joining us.
Thank you, Sam. Good to be with you.
All right, take care. God bless. All right.
Bye.
We're going to be bringing on a first-time voter in a minute. He is our expungement fellow here at ARC, the Anti-Recidivism Coalition. But I want to give a shout out to Steve. Thank you, brother. We'll continue to push forward in a positive way. Also, greatly appreciate your support, brother. I want to really say this again, though. It is vitally important for you to vote. Don't ever let anyone tell you that your right to vote and voting is not important. Your voice has to be heard. Like, that is how we make our cities operate the way we want them to operate. I would even go as far as to say this. If voting was not so important, you often see some people try to stop you from voting. Why would that be? Unless it was important. Okay, I want to introduce Jared again. Jared is our expungement fellow. He should be popping on. Here's Jared right now. Good afternoon, Jared. How you doing? Introduce yourself and tell us how you're doing today.
I'm doing well, Sam. So my name's Jared Villery. I'm the expungement fellow at ARC, running our expungement project. I've been doing the work for about 10 months. Actually from the MCRP program, I was still in custody working for ARC in the community, and have paroled less than 6 months ago. But I'm doing good to be a free man today.
Absolutely. So welcome home. Did you just vote, or are you about to vote?
I'm about to vote. Actually, I'm filling out the ballot right now. Yes,
I have to ask you this. What does that feel like? First, make sure you had a sticker. Like, I kept my first sticker for like a year. I was putting, I had a pin on it and everything until it just fell apart. But how does that feel for the people that are listening? How does that feel for the opportunity for you to vote?
I mean, it's something that, it's revolutionary for me personally, as someone, I'm 40 years old now, and I never had an opportunity to vote. I spent 21 years in prison for something I didn't do, but that's another story. And I spent that time as an advocate most of the time, as getting into a little bit, but the law is kind of life for me, and understanding, the law is created by people. These people are the politicians that we put into office, right? And as a litigator for years, helping people and dealing with some of the most messed up laws in California and in the nation, I realized, we need people in there who are going to pass better laws, right? I mean, it's something that's so important, but we don't pay enough attention to it often, especially in the criminal justice system that impacts our community so much. Our voice really matters in shaping those laws, but the way to do that is to get the right people into office. So empowering me to have my voice play a part in that is just, it's definitely life-changing.
Thank you for that. Tell me, when you were incarcerated, how did you follow the elections?
So I was a big news junkie, kind of like you were talking about. I mean, we didn't have the MSNBC or anything like that. We had over the air, but I was the same thing, watching all the Sunday shows, Meet the Press, what was it, ABC's morning one, with George Stephanopoulos, all that. I would bounce from one to the other. I watched the news. I probably watched the news more than I watched regular TV, because it was the things that, especially when you're talking about like Supreme Court decisions, or the many attempts to recall George Gascon. Who's actually making a difference and trying to correct some of the wrongs that plagued our system. It was a trip. But so I stayed on the news regularly, read newspapers that I get my hands on, stuff like that.
So it's interesting, because I would watch. I would watch Fox News, because I wanted to see the different perspective. I can't remember the guy's name. It was Juan. I can't remember, but he was always on Fox. This one I was incarcerated, but I would watch Fox News. I would watch CNN. I would watch MSNBC. I would watch Meet the Press. Like all of the different news shows, because I was curious. Even now today, I get up really early on Sunday and watch. I think his name is Fareed Zakaria. He's more of a national news on CNN, but he gives oftentimes a really good perspective, not just nationally but internationally. Let me ask you this: how did it feel? And this for our audience, how did it feel when you were incarcerated and knew like you didn't have a say in like any of the policies that were passed that were going to impact your life?
I mean, it was really, really difficult, because, you see, like in real time, we see laws that pass and impact us. I mean, for instance, SB 260, 261 that ARC was the mover behind, and seeing those and following the legislature, seeing like the movement in the committees and all that. And you're like, this is all great, but I have no say whatsoever. And then something that's worse, when you're in prison, a lot of the times you're actually counted in the numbers for the geographic region. So a lot of the times you're considered as a constituent of an individual who would like nothing more than to keep you locked up forever, because your prisons are in these rural, very conservative areas. And instead of being counted from the area you came from, they're getting bigger numbers. So that your placement there is actually strengthening their voice. And it's like, Jesus, I have no way to impact the outcome of whether it's a race for DA, whatever it is. And my voice doesn't really matter, it seems like. And that's kind of why I got into like advocacy in other ways.
Thank you. Tell me this. So you and a number of others, and ARC has definitely been in the advocacy space and getting Proposition 6 on the ballot. Now, this was a 4-year effort, started by it was championed by Kamala Dove, who's now Congresswoman, and then Lori Wilson. And now Prop 6 is on the ballot. Tell us, what role have you played in advocating for Proposition 6?
Well, I've been lucky that, my role at ARC has allowed me to speak with reporters, being profiled in several different articles, Spectrum News story. I've put out several reels for ARC, essentially educating and spreading the message about the importance of passing this law, because something about involuntary servitude is just the degrading nature of it, and the fact that having something like that in place ensures that communities are actually not safer. Because if you're not focusing on ensuring people can take advantage of the opportunities that will set them up in the best station when they leave, with the skill set and the changed thought patterns that will allow them to be pro-social in society, you're going to have, if you don't have that, you're going to have a more dangerous community when they get out, because we've got well over 90% of people who are inside are going to get out, right? So you want your fellow member of the PTA, your neighbor, do you want them to be a better person or not? And that's what it comes down to. If you force them to work and don't allow them to take advantage of positive opportunities, then it will, it works, it's counterintuitive and works against public safety, ideas. So I've been able to do a lot of messaging on that, which has been a wonderful thing.
Absolutely. For the audience, to give you a really great example of like what Jared said about it working against public safety. Some years ago when I was inside, I was written up for going to take a college exam. It was a college program that my family paid for, and the exam was during my work hours, which were from 6 to 2. And my supervisor gave me permission to go. And when I was returning from the exam, his supervisor, sergeant at the time, asked where I was coming from. And I said I was coming from education. He was like, well, don't you work in the building still? And I said, yes, sir. And he said, you're not supposed to be in education. You're getting a write-up. And so I was literally written up for doing the right thing. And so, as Jared said, like, the best way for us to reduce recidivism, the best way for us to enhance public safety is to prioritize rehabilitative programs. It doesn't mean that people won't work. That's not what it means. It means that if I need to take a college exam that's going to help me be a better person and contribute to society, it will not be held against me. And I will not have to choose between either work or my rehabilitative programming. So I've had many calls of people asking this question. It's literally to make sure people have the opportunity to engage with rehabilitative programming so that they cannot reoffend. Jared, let me ask you this. Senate Bill 731, because we said you're our expungement fellow here. Can you tell us what are we doing here at ARC to help folks, and what is Senate Bill 731?
Okay, so I'll tell you about Senate Bill 731 first, then I'll get into the work we do. So in 2022, the legislature passed Senate Bill 731. It was championed by ARC, which is kind of the wonderful aspect of my work, is that ARC was involved from it being just an idea all the way to real world application and implementation, so it's kind of a unique thing. What it did, it created a pathway for the first time for individuals who had served time in prison to actually get their records cleaned up. And it's the first time that it applies to everyone, because we do have another law, AB 2147, that allows individuals who have served in fire camps to get their records cleaned, but it's a very narrow, for only a handful of individuals are eligible. Whereas under SB 731, essentially everyone is eligible, with the exception of individuals who have to register under Penal Code 290, which is the sex offender registry. But after a certain period of time, individuals can get an expungement of their record. And the two biggest things, this is what I always tell, is that as someone who has walked through the system and understands the obstacles, we know that for a person to be successful at reentry, there's two primary things: stable housing and reliable employment, right? Getting a living wage at a consistent job. And yet, what are the things, the first things that a landlord or an employer want? That's going to be a background check. And all too often, that background check leads to individuals not obtaining employment, not obtaining the apartment that they're trying to get on their feet and get into. And all too often, people will revert back to what they know, which can be antisocial and negative for society. So what this does is when an individual gets an expungement, they are actually able to apply for a job, apply for that apartment, and they can legally say they have no convictions, and it becomes illegal for commercial background check companies to report those convictions because it changes it on their rap sheet. So essentially what it becomes is, although it's not sealed, when people are applying for jobs, when they're applying for that licensure or whatever it is, that won't pop up anymore. And so what we do, we are kind of a stopgap because there's an overwhelming amount of need and not enough capacity. So what we do is we build cases up, work on getting all of the materials necessary for people to file, leaving nothing but some court forms to fill out, relatively simple. And then we pass our cases off to partner attorneys at other legal service organizations or public defenders' offices that get the filing process. We've got hundreds of petitions in the courts right now, and we've got a lot of people who are going to have these obstacles removed and are going to be able to really move forward with their life.
Thank you for that, Jared. So for everyone that's listening, you can get your record expunged. I had my record expunged last year, November 9th, 2023. You can get your record expunged. It was amazing. I was not the first, but one of the first. And our goal was ultimately, often we pass policy and we don't look at implementation. And so our goal was to begin the implementation phase of this incredible Clean Slate Act. Across the country, we hear states talk about Clean Slate Act, and I want to definitely endorse and support all of those. But can you go as far as we have in California? Can you actually help everyone pretty much? Like 99% of people with felony convictions have their convictions expunged. Like, if we really are a country of second chances and believe in redemption and hope and things like that, then we should be looking at a Clean Slate Act similar to that of California's in every state. Jared, want to share your closing thoughts? Thank you for joining us. Appreciate you. Share your closing thoughts, brother.
It's my pleasure, man. Honestly, all I can say is I want to encourage people to get out and make your voices heard. You've got tens of thousands of people just in California sitting in there wishing they could have their voices heard. They've been impacted by a system and circumstances in their life, and they've very rarely had any say over, how the forces that be impact their life. So you have an opportunity that far too many people take for granted. Take advantage of it, get out. We encourage you to vote no on Prop 36 and yes on Prop 6 because we want to make sure we still have programs that are going to fund all of the different processes that increase positive programming, pro-social behavior, and reduces recidivism. And of course, slavery should have no part in our country or state. So vote yes on Prop 6.
Thank you, Jared. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. If you don't fully understand Prop 6, please take a moment and read our Constitution. Prop 6 comes, or the exception clause originates from the ending of slavery. Please take a moment to really study and understand what it means to end involuntary servitude and slavery completely. Places like Alabama and Tennessee have already done this. California should not be following. We should be leading in this. I also want to shout out our voter guide. Please post that so everybody can go to our voter guide. Please check it out. ARC has an incredible voter guide. When you have an opportunity, if you want to know more about felony expungement, please go to our website, the Anti-Recidivism Coalition. There it is right there. If you want to know more, it will give you all of that information. Please be informed. The key to changing our world to a better place is to be informed, know our history, and know what we want our future to look like. So I'm going to close now today. And until next time, take care. God bless. And please make sure that you vote. Make sure that you help people vote. If you have to drive them to the polling station, if you have to buy them lunch, just make sure people vote. Your vote is your voice. And that's what this country is about. Take care. God bless. And see you in 2 weeks.